back, the Defense Department has set a goal to implement its Zero Trust framework by fiscal year 2027. DoD Chief Information Officer John Sherman told me at DOTUS in December the department's on track to meet that goal. Randy Resnick is director of the Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office at DoD. John Sahlin is vice president of cyber solutions at GDIT. Gentlemen, welcome. It's great to see you. Randy, welcome. I'll go to you first.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, I talked to John about this, and he was very explicit about the fact that you're focused on making sure that you're meeting the mission requirements of Zero Trust and not just checking off a whole bunch of items on the list of controls, 90 some, I think. How are you going about doing that? How are you assessing success if checking the boxes is not the way that you want to do that?
Well, when we first, thank you for the question. Thanks, it's good to be here. When we came up with the definition of Zero Trust, we realized that the equipment that makes up the infrastructure for Zero Trust has to be integrated. So once you start integrating equipment with the diversity of the vendors that are out there, you start getting to an understanding that there's no way that the government could continue to dictate the type of items we need, because they're not individual items anymore. It's not like I need to buy a firewall, I need to buy an endpoint thing, or I need to buy a gateway. It's not that anymore. So we started thinking, okay, we spent 30 years doing it the old way. It hasn't really worked. It hasn't kept up with the TTPs of the adversary. So instead, why don't we try a different thing? Why don't we say the outcome that we want to achieve in Zero Trust? For us in the DoD, it's stopping the adversary, dead in the tracks, and then work backwards and allow industry to innovate on that concept, which allows for a tremendous amount of innovation. And that's exactly what we've seen in the last 2 years. So we think we have a winning idea. Industry likes it a lot because we're not telling them what to do anymore. It's not a checklist, but in a way we're describing what needs to get done in terms of the 91 activities for our target ZT. But how to go about doing it and which products need to be weaved together and integrated, that's up to them. We just want the outcome.
How do you respond to that? That's what industry's been asking for everything for forever, as long as I can remember, isn't it, John?
Oh my God, it's music to my ears. I love it, and we've had this conversation before. You know, I sometimes come off as a little heretical when I say this, but you know, I firmly believe that cybersecurity, particularly Zero Trust, but in general, it's not about compliance. It's not even really about IT. It's about meeting the mission objectives.
That's right.
And your focus on the outcomes, your focus on stopping the adversary is exactly right. Because for me, as a system developer, as a system builder, I would much rather have use cases. Tell me what you're trying to achieve. Don't give me a bunch of shall statements. And this approach is perfectly in line with that. Tell me what the outcomes are. Tell me what activities we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to stop the adversarial TTPs. And let's just go after it.
And I don't think you've ever heard of that concept prior to Zero Trust.
Certainly not in federal.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not in federal. It's very much a Silicon Valley, agile development, user story driven concept. And I love that, because there are so many proof points of the effectiveness of telling me what, don't tell me how.
Right.
How do you in the department and you in industry consider that concept when you're doing things like pushing it out to the tactical edge, another thing that John and I talked about at DOTUS?
Yep, so we are describing the problem at the tactical edge. Basically, a lot of people think of Zero Trust as only at the enterprise level. Imagine we're in a room this size, but it's packed with air conditioners, dehumidifiers, that's how people think of enterprise. Mm-hmm. But in the tactical edge, depending on the service that you are, if you're the Navy, it might very well be a submarine. If you're in the Marines, it's an individual or a team rolling in the mud.
And for CJADC2, it will be all of those things.
It will be all of
right?
that, right. It'll be the signals. Mm-hmm. So everybody has a different story of what a tactical edge is. And so for zero trust, that becomes very complex because depending on the device that you're using at the tactical edge, it may or may not be able to have the storage or an operating system even that you need for zero trust. That's number one. Number two is zero trust fundamentally needs or requires an identity of the user, of the people that you're communicating with, of other devices. And so if you're completely disconnected, that's what the tactical edge really means. They call it DDIL. If by chance the internet goes down and you're completely disconnected and you have a ZT infrastructure, how do you continue to communicate and do your mission? You know, we don't want to not allow the mission to continue. So we need to think about innovative ways to bring down what is absolutely required and cache it locally, or to do other innovative things that industry brings to bear, because I'm describing as the government or the ZTPFMO the problem, and I'm saying this is the problem, give me a solution for the outcome that I need to get. Yeah. And so we're looking at all kinds of different solutions. You know, I don't want to name products and such, but they're existing, and a lot of companies are developing or building new product to fulfill this requirement. And that's exactly what the DoD wants to see. We want to see a diversity of equipment that performs in the toughest situations.
John, about the edge, you wrote recently, ZT becomes particularly critical as you move down to the tactical edge. How so, and why is that? What multiplies that as one gets closer to the edge?
Well, I think something that Randy said is really important here when we talk about tactical edge, which is the tactical edge is different depending on the service and the mission.
That's right.
It could be at the individual human level. It could be at the platform level, something like a submarine or a ship. It could be a deployed unit, or it could be, you know, the Army looks at the division as their unit of action for a core, or from a unit of action to peel down to the tactical edge at some levels. Each of those face different challenges. They all have different missions to some degree, and the piece parts that comprise that zero trust solution, like Randy was saying, at the individual level, you're not going to have the storage and computing capacity that you would at a platform level or a vehicle level, or certainly at the division level. So that's where it becomes important to understand that one size does not fit all, and you have to think about zero trust in terms of, I like to look at it in terms of capability bricks. I don't necessarily need the entire set to do everything at the enterprise and push that down to every tier of tactical. So understanding what the right set is for each tactical mission is important. And I think that's why it's so important to look at that.
So in cybersecurity, what John just said is so important, and why what he said is so true. When you're in a tactical environment, you could think of the data that you're exchanging as limited in terms of its sensitivity. It's not up to me to decide how long that sensitivity is, but I could tell you it doesn't need to be stored or saved for 30 years. So that being said, you could lighten the load of zero trust, but still absolutely over-design what you require and still allow that communication to happen. Still protecting the data much longer than really the data classification needs to be saved. Sometimes it's minutes, sometimes it's hours or weeks, but whatever it is, that has to be decided with the data owner. But we need to build devices, zero trust devices, that at least protect at what it needs to do, which might mean less than 91 activities to achieve zero trust.
Yeah.
Because again, these devices are lighter, they're more nimble, they have to operate perhaps in a disconnected, so they need to still work, but not at the rigor of an enterprise level. And so we're trying to find that balance point. That's a great conversation we're having in the DoD, and people are starting to resonate with it.
What's your sense of where that conversation's going, where different organizations or groups of people are on that in that conversation?
So that conversation is maturing, and inside the DoD ZTPFMO, we've come to the conclusion just as we have, we call it the fan chart, this 91 and the 152. It's become infamous. But the question becomes, do we need a fan chart, an additional fan chart for DDIL? Or do we need an additional fan chart for OT devices? Yeah. Or do we need a fan chart perhaps for weapon systems? So we've had this conversation the portfolio office has with the joint staff and all kinds of other services in and out of the building. All three that I just mentioned are very, very important. However, when we first began the program, we focused on the IT because that was the elephant in the room. Mm-hmm. So I think we conquered the way to do zero trust in IT, and that's what everybody sees at the present day, and the strategy was written that way. But the other three fan charts, I think, need some development, and I've committed to having my team do that this rest of the fiscal year and beyond, and perhaps come out with a more official fan chart a year plus from now, not to mandate anything in the next few months because we're not there yet, but at least think through the technology, talk to subject matter experts in the field, vendors, very important, and to find out exactly where the right level is. And even the activity names might have to be changed because things in OT might not be anything close to the activities in IT. They may be some different things, so we have to customize it. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm saying I think we need to customize because these are vectors of attack. You need to have zero trust on them at some level, and we can't ignore it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that we need to do going forward, and that's how we would solve that problem.
John, I think I jumped on top of you. You wanted to make a point, and I followed on to Randy a little too quickly.
No, not at all. The differences between IT and OT make the zero trust concept, particularly at the tactical edge, a fascinating question because the way the OT sensors, devices, Internet of Things, we start bringing in drones, right. Remotely piloted vehicles, bring all of this in, they behave. And they behave differently from traditional IT systems. They don't all have the same capabilities. Some of these sensors, like a thermostat, which could be an entry point, mm-hmm. right? If I'm an adversary, I'm not going to go in hot and hard on the most hardened entry point. I'm going to try to come in and flank you from your least protected device. And that's what we see a lot of. And those OT devices, they don't have as much capabilities in some cases. Mm-hmm. So thinking about those nuances and how the OT side of the house works with the IT side of the house is where zero trust allows us to, I think, improve our overall security posture over a network-centric, kind of old-school security model of perimeter security, because it's those little entry points that often get lost in the shuffle.
All right, so that collaboration, John, of IT and OT takes me to another point that you wrote about recently, and that is, you phrase it this way, the importance of getting ZT out of the lab and into the field. How do you perceive organizations in government, not to pick on Randy and his team at DoD, how are people doing that, though, at operationalizing these ideas, these technologies, these concepts? And
that's why it's so important to get out of the lab and into the field. You can only do so much in the lab. I love labs. I love tinkering as much as any engineer, as much as any nerd. Like we said at the beginning, it's all driven by use cases. Mm-hmm. And we can only define the use cases that we can based on our imagination. We put this technology, we put these capabilities out in the hands of the operators, in this case the warfighters, and they're going to stun us with how they would employ this capability and how they would use it. And that's the real value of getting in the field. And we've had some really interesting successes with field exercises like Talisman Sabre and Yamasakura last year, where we were working with Indo-PACOM and Army First Corps. I mean, great feedback from the operators and from the warfighters on, yeah, it's nice that you did this in the lab. That's not really the way we would do this. And that's the value.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as far as getting this out there to put it in the hands of the people who will use it? And it's not, to be fair, just warfighters. It's not just the tip of the spear. It's the entire enterprise of the department, right?
Yep, and it goes beyond that.
Yeah.
So in order to do all of this, I think that we're talking about, we have to change the way, in my mind, we need to change the way industry works with amongst themselves. I mentioned earlier that we needed this integration thing going on, that not any one company really could deliver full zero trust at the target level, this 91. You need a minimum of a bunch of companies, let's say 5, could be more, where you have to integrate your products together. And that's not so easy. So having companies work together normally as frenemies now, whereas before they were competitors, is really antithesis to the business plan of yesterday. Mm-hmm. So I've encouraged vendors privately and publicly in some of the talks I've given that you have to start working together because the Department of Defense is not going to do the integration anymore. We failed at that. We're not good at that. We fight wars, battles. We aren't really that good. We're not experts in the products that we're integrating. The vendors are. So we would rather have the vendors work the hard problems out, which includes patching, and get a secure configuration per our design based on the outcome we want. And really all we want is to install it and then have a patching schedule and allow us to move our data, our users or whatever into this new environment. Mm-hmm. So that, I think, is the future. In order to do that, we need to get vendors working together. So when we do that, it's not only the DoD that's going to benefit. I've been talking, the portfolio office has been talking to the FedCiv community. They have their strategy for zero trust. They're going at a different pace. That's fine. But when you squint your eyes, you'll see the DNA of the DoD strategy for ZT inside. When you look at what the IC is doing, same exact thing. And over the last 2 years since the portfolio office has been formed, we've been contacted by the Five Eyes, our allies in Indo-PACOM, NATO, others. So they all are starting on their zero trust journey. The DoD is far ahead of everybody else in the thinking process, and they're asking for our documents and for help. And so as long as they're an ally, we're leaning forward and doing what we can to strengthen not only their networks, but obviously we're on a very fast pace to strengthen ours.
John, we have a little bit less than a minute left. What are you telling the people that you work with in government that they should be paying attention to over the horizon a year from now or 2 years from now that maybe is not something they need to deal with today, but is something that that they should be aware of that's coming down the pike?
I think that what I usually tell them is start now. Make some progress and learn as much as you can, because we can't predict what our adversaries are going to be doing, what their TTPs are going to be doing a year from now, 5 years from now. And I think that collaboration is necessary, it's critical, but it's critical to get started. And I love what you said, Randy, about working together in collaboration. And I may end up, probably fired for saying this, but I agree with you. My candle
Nothing
doesn't.
wrong with that.
My candle doesn't burn brighter by putting out someone else's, and I think that working with our frenemies is important. Working with our competitors is critical, and let's get at it. Yeah.
And let's not forget the DIB. They'll benefit as well.
That's right.
John and Randy, it's a great conversation. Thanks for joining me today.